that he's probably the most influential financial journalist, in the world right now.
Wow.
For many, many decades with the Financial Times, and now for the last 7 years or so in New York with the great house of Bloomberg. And in a previous meeting that we had, if any of you read Bloomberg, you will notice that over the last 6, 7, 8 months, every article has sort of an AI summary, where an AI sort of digests sort of the 3 key takeaways. And John told me very happily that he's one of 2 authors at Bloomberg where the AI can't cope to summarize what it is that he's doing. So here you go. We've got the last human journalist, in town. Now, the topic is obviously serious. There is an enormous amount of developments going on. Every day, another crisis. And financial markets, obviously in awe of what's going on with, on the one hand, the AI revolution, and at the same time, of course, with this incredible regime change that is going on from the center of global finance, which is the United States of America, which is Wall Street. So without further ado, what we're going to do is John's going to talk for 10, 15 minutes. Then we'll have a little chat, and please prepare your questions and, become part of the discussion. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Jesper. I think that debating tour we did with the FT, we were debating whether capitalism had a future. And I was arguing for capitalism and you were arguing against, not necessarily because you believe that, but any good debater has obviously to get their heads into the opposing position. But that was a lot of fun, arguing about whether capitalism had a future in a beautiful restaurant on the Bund in Shanghai with Pudong skyscrapers staring at you through the window. Anyway, yes, that was a surreal experience, which doesn't go away easily. It's a great privilege to be here. I love coming to Japan. I wish I came to Japan more often. Whatever one says about economics doesn't alter what really matters about a country, and what matters about Japan is that it's a joyful place to be with a wonderful, rich culture, and I always love coming here. One of the other things that has been wonderful about this week is that I've been able to have whole long conversations without ever once mentioning the T word. You know what I mean. So this is actually quite a good opportunity for me to try to get into some understanding of what the Trump trade is. Obviously, sitting in New York, covering Wall Street, every third word I use includes Donald Trump. My kids did a Google search for my face and found several photos of Donald Trump coming up because I mention him so often. His photo appears in so many pictures, stories under my byline that Google is spooled into offering them Donald Trump when they're looking for me. So this is a chance, now that I'm on the other side of the planet and I've had a week trying to understand Japan, to give a little perspective on where the market has come to in its relationship with our new president. This is the entirety of my notes for this. I'm trying to think out loud, which I hope is what people are going to find useful. And I will be fascinated to hear the questions. Now, I think it's fair to say that we have so far been through 4 stages since Donald Trump won the election in November, in terms of Wall Street's attitude to him, the way that he has been treated. Stage 1 is the Trump trade. People were very surprised that he actually won the popular vote. They weren't surprised that he won the presidency, but the sense that he really had won a mandate in the way that he hadn't before, and that there were Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, somehow did take people by surprise. And this was taken as meaning he really is, this is his show now, he's won. And also, he now has the freedom, he isn't running again, he is going to do what he wants to do. And there was a lot of wishful thinking that that meant he was going to do the things that Wall Street thought were good ideas and not do the things that Wall Street thought were bad ideas. So you could live with tightening down on immigration. There was a kind of belief that he was talking about tariffs, but he must know that this wasn't a good idea. There wasn't going to be more on tariffs. But we were going to get lots and lots of lovely tax cuts and deregulation, which obviously Wall Street likes, that we were going to get a fundamentally pro-business administration. And I'm talking about this sarcastically, but to be fair, the history of Trump 1.0 did tend to bear that out. He only started really trying to raise tariffs in a big way in 2018. The first big agenda item which he delivered on was a very big tax cut, which did lead to very strong year for Wall Street. There were few examples of real extremity. If you look at remittances to Mexico, they carried on rising with almost no interruption during the first Trump term. There was very little real practical shift on immigration. There was a very real shift in tariffs, but it was fairly incremental, and it didn't have that big an impact. There was a sense, he may be mad, but he's not stupid, is a phrase people use. But that's right. You don't want to crash the economy. You don't want to. You want things to go well on your watch, so common sense will prevail. So the initial response is, this is America first. This is just fantastic. The dollar surges upwards. Europe in particular takes a bath. The stock market goes very, very strongly. And there is a belief that, the America first, American exceptionalism is just going to be ever more emphasized under this new administration. Then you have a period that starts a week or so into after the inauguration. In fact, in terms of the US's performance compared to the rest of the world stock market, the peak is what we call in Britain Boxing Day, December the 26th. It's the quiet week between Christmas and New Year. The US peaks relative to the rest of the world and begins a very slight decline, which at that point is because people realize perhaps they've taken the Trump trade as far as it will go. Then you begin to get a real hard change when it starts with tariffs on Canada and Mexico to stop fentanyl, which is a mind-blowingly stupid thing to have done with two countries that he couldn't afford to have a bad trading relationship with. Fentanyl is a very serious issue in the US. If you wanted to come up with a list of 100 measures that might help combat the fentanyl scourge in Middle America, putting tariffs on Canada wouldn't make the top 100. It was a ludicrous thing, but then again, within days, Canada and Mexico had basically got him to go away with measures that really had nothing, really made no difference at all on the ground. This was cosmetic. This is Donald wanting to have what looks like a victory. So again, people feel a little calmer. Then the stock market peaks on the day that Donald Trump intervenes to stop the congestion tax in New York. And delightfully, for those of you, there's a theory that magazine covers can call the top and bottom of a market. So Business Week had a headline, "The Death of Equities," shortly before the market hit rock bottom in 1981, for example. Would never happen now, it's under Bloomberg's ownership, of course. there was a mock Time cover that the White House tweeted out of Donald Trump standing in front of Manhattan, the Manhattan skyline, wearing a crown with the headline King of New York. And that's, at that point, the stock market peaked. So there was a growing sense from that point onwards that maybe Donald Trump might actually mean it and that this could be a problem. That steadily develops as the stock market begins to decline, and during the first term, he had obviously really cared about the stock market, had judged himself by the stock market, and if you're Wall Street, that means there is a put, we're safe. There's not going to be a problem if Donald Trump turns, he's not going to let the stock market go down on his watch. Trump gives a couple of interviews saying, well, we want to change things around here. We want to correct all these injustices. Maybe the stock market's going to have to go down. And there's a big sense of doubt of, my God, maybe he actually means this. And so you do get quite a major correction running into what is billed as Liberation Day. Unfortunately, this is one of the true geniuses of Donald Trump, and I'm not being sarcastic here. It is a genius element of Donald Trump's political skill that he has an ability to put a name to something that won't go away. Those tariffs are Liberation Day. Everybody calls them Liberation Day. I have no choice but to call them Liberation Day. You all know what I mean, even though, of course, it wasn't a Liberation Day. Nobody was liberated by these quite ridiculous tariffs that were levied. So at this point, you've also had Trump tweeting that he was minded to fire Jay Powell from the Fed, that he was a knucklehead. And so at this point, suddenly Wall Street wakes up to the possibility, and the rest of the world's investors wake up to the possibility, well, actually, maybe this is a guy who is prepared to, he's prepared to put 50% tariffs on countries on the flimsiest of reasons, and he's prepared to fire the head of the world's most powerful central bank. Maybe we want to get out of stocks in this situation. And what was most telling, the stock market was expensive going in. Stock markets do move around a lot. What really mattered was the interplay of the dollar and bond yields. So you have, generally speaking, when people sell treasuries and send the yields up, that attracts money into the dollar. This was one of those rare occasions where bond yields went up and the dollar went down simultaneously. That is a classic emerging market combination which implies sudden loss of confidence in the country that it's happening to. When it's the US, that really obviously matters a lot. So among developed countries, my home country, Liz Truss in the UK gave us an example of what can happen when you do something that really shakes international and local market confidence in you. So at this point, we have a different narrative takes over completely, which is the end of exceptionalism and sell America. America that, thanks to the success of the Magnificent Seven, tech stocks in particular, everybody in the world is overweight the US. You just needed to buy America 10 years ago and do nothing, and by now, thanks to the way the stock market's moved, you have an infeasibly heavy weighting towards the States. It's an easy and simple trade to try to retreat from that. And so you also want to protect yourself against the dollar. So what definitely did happen, it's still questionable whether there was as much capital flight at the time as people thought. But there certainly was an immense move to hedge the dollar, which will of its own effect cause the dollar to move. After a week from Liberation Day, you have a succession of events. Donald Trump says that he's going to put a 90-day pause on tariffs, except on China. But critically, the messaging from the Treasury, from the White House, is he's doing this because so many people want to talk. We want to get a good deal. But Donald Trump, and this is an aspect of his political communication which isn't genius, actually told the truth in a comment to readers, a comment to reporters, that the bond market was getting yippy, and which was true. And that it was necessary to do something to calm down the bond market. So then the following week, he announces, again via tweet, that of course he has no intention of firing Jay Powell. Put these two together, and you have what appears to be the market nirvana situation where, yes, Donald Trump isn't prepared to do something if it upsets the market. Therefore, if you have an interest in the market, whoopee, life is good again. Now, this gave way. I have mixed emotions about this. One of my greatest legacies at the Financial Times was that I hired, when I was running the Lex column, a really great, lovely guy called Rob Armstrong. And he took over my daily newsletter when I left for Bloomberg. So I'm obviously very proud at one level that it was Rob who came up with the phrase taco. Trump always chickens out. Which he actually mentioned for the first time in early April, not long after Liberation Day. And nobody particularly takes any notice. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, it suddenly takes off as this phrase that everybody is using, that it's the taco trade. So well done, Rob. Lovely guy. I do gnash my teeth slightly, but dear FT, I might have left you, but I did find you the guy who gave you the taco trade. So, so this anyway becomes the trade that lasts through into early August is taco. Another way of putting it is in less folksy, markety language is Trump put. That one way or another, Trump isn't going to do anything to upset the markets. He always does chicken out. We're fine. Then the pause in the tariffs comes over. And broadly speaking, nobody gets a significantly better deal than they were going to get in the first place. Countries as significant as Brazil and India get worse deals than they were originally offered. For Brazil, there is no coffee production in the US. There are no coffee producers in America to protect from Brazilian coffee. The many people who want to import coffee from Brazil suddenly have a 50% tariff because the American administration doesn't like the way the legal process is working with Jair Bolsonaro. So we're back. This, for my money, is as absurd and terrible a piece of economic policy as anything that was suggested on Liberation Day. We're protecting the American coffee industry because we don't like Lula, is just not a good way to run policy. Similarly, with the Fed, Adriana Kugler, for reasons that have still never really been explained, resigns suddenly and can be replaced. She had been a Biden appointee. She gets replaced by Stephen Miran. Then we have the really quite shocking news that the head of the administration that's basically supposed to be charged with taking Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac private again has spent his time going through mortgage details and thinks he's found an irregularity in Lisa Cook, another Biden appointee Fed governor, in her mortgage details. And so there is now an attempt to fire Lisa Cook, which would then open another position that would enable the Trump administration basically due to the arcane way the Fed is structured, to control the entire monetary policy setting committee as of next year. You would have a majority of the 7 governors, and a majority of the governors can veto appointments for the presidents of the regional Feds who make up the rest of the voters on the FOMC. So if you found 4 people who were prepared to do that, there was a real possibility that you would see the Fed basically do what the White House told it without there needing to be any great debate in Congress, new legislation. You also then discover, to great surprise, that almost nobody fights back. The logic in terms of tariffs. Now, there was a lot of game theory, which I spent a lot of time working on. There is a lot of game theory. It's beyond the chicken game and the prisoner's dilemma, which we all know. There is also some very interesting game theory on how you deal with a bully, which is obviously what's relevant when it comes to American tariff policy. And the logic was supposed to be that you can beat a bully if everybody, but there are 2 conditions. Everybody needs to stand together, and you need to be prepared to take some pain. So the argument was, everybody retaliates against the US, but not against each other. That way, everybody has the pain of tariffs on their relationship with the US, but not with everybody else. The US has to put up with protectionism from the whole of the rest of the world. It hurts everybody, it hurts the US more. Eventually, the bully gives up. That, in very simplified terms, was the structure that people expected to happen. And it didn't. Everybody decided that the way to deal with this bully was to give him what he wants and wait for everything to explode in his face. I don't see another way of looking at it. If there is a strategy that the rest of the world has, it's, well, this is stupid, but it's going to hurt a lot for us to stand up to it now. Give him what he wants and wait for it to go wrong. I don't think that's a very good strategy, which is why I'm quite alarmed. But now, given that what I've just said is really quite negative, quite alarming for the market, you probably want me to explain why the stock market is still very close to an all-time high in the States, why the dollar has arrested its decline. I think there are a few reasons for that. The first is that tariffs so far are, at some level, working for the US. The increase in revenue from tariffs is now roughly 20%. They're getting about, the revenue from tariffs is roughly equivalent to 20% of the revenue they get from individual income tax. So this is big. This does matter. The point of the tariffs is that there'll be fewer imports and you won't get so much revenue eventually. But for now, it's making a lot of fiscal decisions less difficult. So there is more of a sense, well, while this is happening, he's bound to carry on, so we're not going to try to fight back. And indeed, the news today, which I've only just had to assimilate from the headlines, 100% tariffs on pharmaceuticals, 25% tariffs on trucks. The main reason we need to put tariffs on trucks is because American truck manufacturers are now uncompetitive because they have to pay a tariff on importing steel and aluminum, which other countries don't. So this is a tariff to protect American truck makers from the effects of the tariff on steel and aluminum that the Americans have imposed. It's not a great way to run a railroad, but it's still, the road, it's still moving. Another point that I think is underestimated, and I'm trying to avoid technical jargon, but if you look at the MOVE index of bond volatility, volatility is of itself volatile. You will normally see an index jag around like that. Obviously, after Liberation Day, it goes like that. Starting about 2 weeks after Liberation Day, it is a perfect, gently declining slope. We've had all the various things I've just been mentioning about. We've had serious threats to the independence of the Federal Reserve. The bond market has been totally pacified, largely because Scott Bessent has been playing a blinder in the way that he has managed issuance of debt. Janet Yellen was doing something similar before, incidentally. We've had two administrations in a row that have behaved in a fiscally rather irresponsible way, and they've had rather good Treasury secretaries to help them get away with it. The bottom line on the Fed for a lot of people is they don't believe Fed independence is going to go away. They think that we'll instead get some kind of a Goldilocks-y scenario where we're going to get a Fed that is somewhat more dovish than it should be, thanks to the political pressure being put on it. And in the really short term, if you have a stock market at an all-time high and pressure for rates to come down, that does kind of imply a melt-up. And you want to be in the stock market before, timing getting out of a melt-up is everything, but you want to be in the market. So there is a confluence of events, and then there's AI, which all of us in this room know why there is a lot of bullishness and excitement about artificial intelligence. It might be overstated, but there is an irrefutable fact that NVIDIA is selling a remarkable number of AI chips at a remarkably high makeup, and people are buying them. So there is at the very least, there is a bubble in people buying chips, not the bubble in buying the stock. While that kind of fascination to invest in AI is carrying on, that also supports the market. So at the moment, markets thought they were the boss for a while, and for the time being, they are prepared to be subservient. I suspect things come to an end, but I may yet prove to be wrong. My expectation, and I think it's the implicit expectation of many investors, finance ministers around the world, is that this is going to end badly in the States. The most important point about if there was one clear mandate that Donald Trump had, it was not to let inflation get out of hand again. People very understandably weren't prepared to forgive the Democrats for letting inflation get out of hand. Slapping tariffs on more or less anything that comes into the country while trying to force the Fed to have uneconomically low interest rates is the exact opposite of what you would do if you were arriving with a big mandate to reduce inflation. My best guess is that inflation is going to take off, that we get some version of stagflation, and I don't know exactly how the administration will respond, and I'm nervous about it. But that's my best guess, is that the rest of the world has decided, okay, you can have your way, and we are hopefully going to be okay when we pick up the pieces after this goes wrong. So that's a nice positive note on which I will pass back to Jesper for a conversation. But that, after a week away from Wall Street, that's my best attempt to try to summarize my life for the last 9 months or 10 months or whatever it is now.
No, fantastic, John, and thank you very, very much. Just to sort of kick off the conversation, I mean, this calm in markets, right? Another way to sort of think about this, it's not just Warren Buffett who's got records amount of cash,
yes,
right? Actually, all these sort of institutional surveys suggest that everybody is cashed up. Yes. That everybody was sort of expecting something bad to happen. And actually, it kind of, I mean, you can get emotionally involved about the social policies, right? But in terms of the actual, for American corporations, policies,
Yes.
right? It's nothing bad really has happened. And so there's this pain trade because the market keeps on going up. I've got too much cash. I underperform. My investors get angry at me for underperforming. Therefore, I need to start to put more money into the market.
Yes, that's a very good point. It's quite right that people and this is true both in terms of corporate inventories of stuff and for the investors, the kind of people we spend our lives talking to for keeping cash on hand. People knew that some odd things were about to happen and they prepared accordingly, and the positive result from that is that the tariffs don't hurt as much as they do at first, and that there is money to deploy in markets. Yes, I think that's a very valid point.
I mean, it's very interesting. For example, I mean, if you talk about tariffs, and this is for economists, you know, you're not allowed to talk about optimal tariffs, but that does actually work if you're a monopsonist. If you're the biggest buyer, you've got price power.
Yes.
And look at what happened just in my little field here in Japan. Oh my God, 15% tariffs on cars. Well, Japanese export car prices have dropped by 18% over the last 2 months. They're sucking it up.
Much?
Yeah, they're sucking it up. So it's not going to be Joe Sixpack. Sorry, it's not going to be the American consumer who's going to be paying for that. It's going to come out of a combination of Japanese corporate earnings, you know, as well as, and the Japanese government has been very good at putting up all sorts of support mechanisms. If you're hurt by the tariffs, part of that cost is going to be socialized, right? So, you know, but the reality is that actually for, you know, Mr. Lutnick, it's actually a nice win.
Yes, let me add a few points to that. Obviously, Japan has an advantage over the States at the moment that Japan remains a remarkably cohesive country. That is what, by comparison with the US, I don't think that is a remotely contentious statement. All right.
I thought you were going to say by comparison with Germany or France or all these nice...
Even with comparison to Germany and France, yes. If people are worried about Takaichi, right, try Marine Le Pen. I mean, you know, there's really not much comparison there. So the social cohesion part of this does matter to them. I think you need to also throw in that China matters, and China. Part of the reason Joe Sixpack isn't being effective is but many other countries might have a problem is that China, whatever the Chinese are going to Joe Sixpack, is dumping stuff on everybody else at startling rates. So Chinese exports are now at an all-time high, even though their exports to the US are 25% below their high. That's a lot of extra stuff they've sold to other people, and they've done it at rock-bottom prices. You know, a strong WTO to stop dumping might be a good idea, but never mind. We've decided we don't need one of those. But yeah, I suppose I would add one caveat and one strengthening point. A lot of what is in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, another example of something where Donald Trump forces us to adopt language against all common sense. A lot of that doesn't happen until the next fiscal year. There is quite a lot of fiscal juice coming in January, and people know that. And that's another positive that hasn't really hit. So not only have tariffs not really begun to hurt because people had built up inventories ahead of time, but also the fiscal pump priming hasn't really begun yet either.
I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you know, it's like, okay, so you're doing protectionism. So if I'm a, you know, manufacturer, or if I do business, okay, America is a homogeneous market, right? And what am I doing? It's very interesting. We had one of these Japanese airline companies, ANA, the blue one, you know, had an earnings call recently, and they said, "Oh, our business is booming. Business class tickets are selling, you know, the hottest ever, and that's because of Trump." Because, you know, Japanese businessmen are so nervous, and they are now having to go to America to negotiate special carve-outs, special this, that, or the other. Plus, and this is the point I was going to make, Japan has committed to $550 billion of direct investment.
Yeah.
Masayoshi Son has committed to $500 billion with this, what's that thing called, Stargate. The Germans, not the Germans, the Europeans.
The Germans are building some tanks.
Well, we used to know how to do that.
drones,
We're now
yes.
relying on the Koreans to teach us how to do this. No, but the point I'm trying to make is, according to, if you add it all up, supposedly about $16 trillion of investment commitments into the United States of America have been summoned, over the last 6 months there. And even if $16 trillion, if this is Donald Trump doing the usual thing, so cut it by 2/3,
Yes.
right? I mean, $5 trillion of foreign direct investment coming to the United States of America in a $30 trillion economy is still very, very significant. So,
Yes, and no. One point I would make, it's certainly the case that you would think that protectionism isn't so bad if you're the one being protected. I think the truck tariffs this morning are quite an interesting sign that the lobby which has fought most ferociously against tariffs so far has been the motor industry. They absolutely, passionately do not want to be protected because they know how complicated the supply chains are, and this is really messing them up. They certainly didn't want to have the, I was, earlier in my career, I covered Mexico for a few years. I mean, the components and the, on one side of the Texas border and the assembly on the Mexican side, the one car will literally thread across the border 3 or 4 times. It becomes completely impossible with tariffs, and you need to rebuild. You need to restart your processes. Toyota showed the world how important getting that process right is, and how dangerous it is to mess around with it. So there is no particular sign at the moment of anybody in the States benefiting. And if you look, the ISM numbers, which come out every beginning of every month, they have a list of, they give you it's like the Fed's beige book. So you have all the raw numbers about what people reported about, whether they were paying more prices, blah, 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 whether their inventories were going up or down. But they then have a couple of pages of just commentary from what people said. The last 2 months, the manufacturing one, there's been 2 pages, comments from 20-odd purchasing managers. All of them are about tariffs. All of them are negative. So the ISM badly wants to get across to people. Everybody at the sharp end here knows that this is terrible news for them. And these are the American businesses that are being protected. And I think that's, so I would be careful about how helpful it is to them to be protected. It's actually because the genie of globalization is out of the bottle. They have their manufacturing all over the place. And this shock to the system could be more dangerous to the US than it is to some of the other countries where actually more stuff is built inside in country than it is in the States. One other point just on Japanese tourism or Japanese travel. I've been going shopping in Ginza using my British credit card so that it tells me how much I've spent on things in pounds. And it's been quite difficult not to just laugh out loud at cashiers as I see how cheap everything is. Once you've got over your jet lag and paid your fare to get here, there is no reason not to come to Japan as a tourist at the moment. I would imagine there must be quite a lot of tourism going on. yeah, I was feeling guilty. I shouldn't really be doing this. And then I see how much I've spent and think, oh, maybe I should buy another one, you know. Go next door and spend another few hours buying things in Ginza.
And John, the answer to that is obviously you should.
Oh,
right? I mean,
do my bit for corporate Japan.
Inbound tourism spending is now close to 2% of GDP, right? So that's quite a significant, and we're waiting for your contribution. Before I open up the floor for questions here, sort of one question: what do you make of the deregulation agenda that you have? I mean, you have, for example, specifically for financial services.
Yes.
The fact that crypto and stable coins are going to be, now officially endorsed. You've got a new head of the SEC who's going to make that possible. You've got everybody from JP Morgan down the pipes building their own little systems. What?
And you're confident that the administration is on your side because the Trump family literally has a lot of skin in the game through crypto.
It's l'état c'est moi.
Skin in the game, exactly. Skin in the game. They're following Nassim Taleb. They're making sure they have their skin in the game. I'm a veteran of LTCM and Lehman. And I actually spent a lot of time, I feel very guilty about it now for the FT. My first stint in Wall Street was covering the great deregulation of the 90s, the end of Glass-Steagall, and the succession of things that were done to chip away at that. And, Sandy Weil and John Reed get together to create Citigroup, which has turned out to be an unmanageable beast ever since, but never mind. That forces the... now that it's got a British woman in charge of it, it's obviously doing quite brilliant. Yes, but anyway. I listened to some naysayers who just made the point, well, if you're going there's a guy at Yale called Gary Gorton who refers to the period from the 1930s to the 1990s as the quiet period. America's banking's natural default position is bank runs and defaults and crises. And then, thanks to the heavy-handed reaction to the Great Depression, because certainly a lot of Glass-Steagall and a lot of the rules against multi-state banking seemed totally outdated by the time they were rolled back. There weren't any bank runs for 60 years. Everything ran smoothly, and then they rolled back those regulations, and within 10 years there was an epic financial crisis. And I tended to believe, Larry Summers, for it was he was very much in favour of doing this at the time, and I did talk to people who were much more nervous about this. I didn't quote them as prominently as I should have done. The FT story on the moment when Clinton signed the repeal of Glass-Steagall into law starts with the intro, the Glass-Steagall Act, the outdated and obsolete financial regulations that have governed the US since the Depression was repealed yesterday. That was the news story about it. Anyway, I am still burned by the feeling that I didn't understand and communicate effectively quite how risky what was happening was. One thing Scott Bessent has said that really scares me, where I think he is wrong, to be clear, is he made a comment that there was far more capital, far more excitement happening in private credit and private equity than was happening in banks. And that told him that the banks were being too heavily regulated. And perhaps because I'm over-extrapolating from my experience of the 90s and the aughts, it tells me that private credit is being under-regulated. One or the other, or most probably a mixture of the two, is true. I don't think the logic of the situation is to take the banking system and let it take as many risks as private credit is doing. In the short run, deregulation is market positive. Duh. I mean, of course it is. It's a reason to buy stocks. In the medium term, we're all prisoners to our own experiences. I covered the deregulation and didn't realize quite quite how much the risks were. I then covered the crisis. So you could certainly argue that I am the prisoner of my own perceptions and my own experience. I don't like it at all. I think it's dangerous. And we need to see exactly how far they go. And on that cheery note, yes.
Terry, talking about bank runs.
I'm still trying to recover from 2008. Terry Porte, I'm the co-chair of Asia Society Japan. Thank you so much, John, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you want to learn more about Asia Society Japan, please see Sawako at the end of lunch. So can we talk about important things? Tylenol and windmills? Sorry, to be more serious, you mentioned something about tariffs and their revenue impact.
Yes.
Which I think is quite interesting. Now, clearly, Bessent is a smart fellow. He's forced to say a lot of stupid things because that's part of the loyalty oath to Donald Trump. But he's a smart fellow. He knows that the deficits are going to be large.
Yes.
So, tariff revenue, stablecoin. He expects lots to come from, although that's all short term. And you mentioned that the Trump family has skin in the game. I remind people that the last time they were in the casino business, it did not end well. We should remember this.
Yes.
But so tariffs, stablecoin, it's small change, but every little bit helps. $100,000 for your H-1B visa. We still haven't seen the golden visa one. Trump said trillions with a T would come from that, and so on and so forth. Here's my question. If you look at Polymarket, right now they are saying that there is a 42% chance, only 42% chance, that the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump tariffs. Now, at Labor Day, it was a 60% chance.
That's interesting.
It's trending down. My question is this. So the court expected to be the poodle of the Trump administration actually rules against the tariffs. Then all those tariff revenues have to be returned. And then it's going to be hard to get new tariff revenue.
Well,
Stablecoin accident takes place. All that short-term treasury investment may not happen. So do you think that those are real risks? Do you think the market thinks about them? Do you think about them? Should we think about them? What should we think?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think they're real risks. I think part of why Scott Bessent is raising that issue of returning tariff revenue is precisely to put more pressure on the middle three justices on the Supreme Court. I'm not a lawyer. I do think if I had my career over, if I could somehow or other end up writing about the Supreme Court and American law rather than finance, they're both fascinating. Any kind of journalism, what you want is to find a really good prism, a good lens to view the world. And I've ended up, my career has been about finance and using finance to see the world. Supreme Court and American constitutional law is another fascinating way to view the states. Certainly my basic grasp as a non-lawyer is that it's a very hard stretch and it will be very difficult for an honest lawyer who cares for their reputation to say that you really can justify the tariffs that have been set on the basis of an economic emergency. There isn't one. And even if there were, we've said in as many words that the reason there's a 50% tariff on Brazil, which, as I've said, is a country that has, with which America has a surplus and which makes a bunch of things that America cannot make if it wants to, is because we're annoyed about the way they're treating Jair Bolsonaro. I cannot see how even Clarence Thomas could say, okay, yes, fine. We don't need Congress to do this. It's obviously an emergency. That is a real risk. That said, the middle three, Roberts and Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh. Certainly Roberts and Kavanaugh are very loyal Republicans. They will occasionally do things. Roberts let Obamacare go through because I think correctly he thought that it would be bad for the Republicans, that this was just not something that the court could do as an institution, and that it would be too damaging for the politically to take that position. I think it was ultimately a political judgment he made. I think it was probably quite a good one. It's conceivable that for political reasons you'll see the same thing happen on tariffs. But yes, it's certainly something we should care about. Stable coins, yes, depending on how you do it, it can become a stealth money printing, which is lethal. Again, really terrifying. The one that I think the Supreme Court will probably decide it is definitely going to be on the institutionalist side is the Fed. If the case against Lisa Cook were much clearer and there was already legal undertakings against her, maybe, but you've really got to be very clear-cut before you try to fire a Fed governor for cause. And I think the administration overplayed its hands both in exactly how damning the evidence against her was, because American mortgages are outrageous. I've heard people complaining about Japanese bureaucracy, and I'm sure with justification. American mortgages are ludicrously complicated. It's easy to make an innocent mistake. But the fact that they tried hard to get her fired in time for the FOMC meeting made it very clear that what they cared about was the policy, not the fact of we cannot have. I don't see how the Fed. I don't see how the Supreme Court can possibly let that go through. I think part of why the market is calmer is this is going to be a Fed that has pressure on it and will bend to it occasionally, but it's not a Fed that's going to be broken by the administration. And there are many, many problems with the Fed. I spend much of my life criticizing the Fed. That is good as far as the market is concerned. Better the flawed institution than one that is basically run by this current White House.
So if the Supreme Court rules against, we get triple yasu. We get, you know this term, this is wonderful, you can learn a little Japanese. Triple yasu, the three weaknesses. So you got the stock market crashing, the bond market crashing, and the dollar crashing.
So then we'll have the economic emergency, and then the tariff.
Oh, then you can, yes. Create the emergency, and then you can do it, yes.
Another question. Jennifer.
Jennifer Rogers, one of the founding members of Asia Society. Also, as an American, you're living in New York, but every day I actually read Bloomberg because I find the political news so upsetting. But even saying that, with the Trump board, every day I kind of read it and I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry. So I appreciate your candid discussion.
Right.
So my question is, being here in Japan with a lot of the manufacturing here, right, and the tariffs, et cetera, how do you plan for this? The Japanese have been scrambling and, things keep moving. So I had sort of two elements. The first thing is, it seems to me that Trump is trying to force people to build manufacturing overnight in the U.S., which seems a little bit crazy and also a long-term versus a short-term play. Is that really the intention, and how practical or pragmatic is that relative to any infrastructure funding that may come in? I'm not that familiar with what exactly is in, the beautiful bill. But also, when you consider that and what you were saying about Wall Street, there's such a lack of reaction. Everybody's scrambling to make it work. You've got to have this confluence of different economic factors. What do you think the time frame is going to be where Wall Street gets alarmed enough to unite?
Something we know not what needs to tip, which is an irritatingly vague Malcolm Gladwell idea. We reach a tipping point. Just to respond to some of those points, generally speaking, if there is an argument for protectionism, and there are arguments for protectionism, we've certainly saw. You just need to go through the Rust Belt to see the arguments against unfettered free trade, and all of us, most of us here, probably think of ourselves instinctively as free traders, all of us must bear that in mind. It's real, it's human pain that was caused by it. Generally, you only resort to protectionism when you've got something to protect. There would actually have been, if we were talking about, again, we're all subject to our experiences. My childhood was in Britain in the 70s, so I tend to think of corporatist attempts to do industrial policy rather negatively, because that was an example of a Western country really trying to do it and failing awfully in what happened to Britain in the 70s. But if you were going to try some kind of a more practical, okay, globalization as we've done it hasn't worked, we've got to try to do something else that's going to have to involve some kind of protectionism. Something along the lines of what Biden did followed once once the subsidies have happened and you've started doing the building the solar energy plants and the whatevers, the EVs, and you've given people the incentives to come and build plants. Yes, and then protect it with reasonably precisely targeted tariffs to make sure that nobody undercuts them on price, that China can't dump. You know, China has got the huge lead in EVs and solar panels and all the rest of it at the moment. So start by juicing up, using some tax dollars to get an American industry in those things going properly, and then use tariffs to make sure China can't dump on it and strangle it at birth. That actually, I'm not wild about it. I know what happened to British Leyland back home, et cetera, et cetera. That does make quite a lot of coherent sense. But we're actually abandoning a bunch of the stuff that Biden did, which I'm not necessarily, I wasn't a fan of that. He plainly overdid the pump priming and paid a price for it. But doing that, as admitting, okay, free trade is hurting, the government is going to get into the business of being an actor in the economy and try to pick some winners, and then saying we're not going to let free trade do everything, we're going to protect this business we've just done. That makes eminent sense. I mean, whether it's a good idea, it's a coherent, logical thing you're going to do if you don't like what's happened with deindustrialization after free trade. But we're not doing that. Building plants takes a long time and it's very exciting. Again, going back to Britain, we ended up having a lot of Japanese, Korean car makers came once Margaret Thatcher had broken the unions, and free trade actually ended up working for Britain. Free trade plus a rather cruel attitude to the unions, who previously had been far too powerful. Something like that works. It takes years. This is not the right order in which to try to do things.
I mean, this sort of classic infant industry argument, right? I mean, you need a cohesive, coherent, government rather than one that changes policy on a tweet every day, right?
Yes.
But on that, while we're on this subject, right? The People's Republic of China. Talk to me a little.
Yeah.
You've heard of them. My cynical conservative friends sitting on boards at Japanese car companies sort of say, well, actually, we're quite happy to pay the 15% as long as Mr. Trump keeps BYD and the others out of the American market.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is there a Nixon goes to China? Is there a possibility of a deal where Trump gets BYD to build 10 factories in red states or blue states or whatever they're called?
That's certainly what he says he wants. This was one of there was an interview. There was an interview he did with my boss, John Micklethwaite. This is the thing. British people called John are really dominating American financial journalism these days. John interviewed Trump at I think it was the Economic Club of Chicago. And he used to be at The Economist, absolute classic Walter Bagehot, free trade approach is what John sincerely believes in. That's what he comes from. And so he was very strongly pushing back at Trump for the tariff arguments. And Trump made one of his best, this is what happens on the rare occasions when people really do continue to ask him questions. You can actually get some you can get some interestingly coherent responses. His point was, there are no tariffs at all if you build here. I want you to build here. If you look, this is one of the phrases that's gone out of the window. Stephen Mirren's User's Guide to Reforming the World System. How many people here have not read Stephen Mirren's thing that he published in November saying that they would charge a user fee to people if they wanted to buy treasuries? You have to pay for the privilege of lending to us. That was the really ridiculous part of it, obviously. But his original notion of a Mar-a-Lago Accord was not totally a plaza-like thing, but we'll agree to weaken the dollar. And part of the sugar is that will give you an incentive to do that is we will pay you very nice money to set up plants here. That there's going to be this one big deal, big offer. I don't really think this administration has behaved in quite the right way to achieve that so far. I gave it, again, like I was saying with the notion of taking what Biden had started and following on from it. I mean, it's not stupid. It's a very difficult thing to pull off. It needs a really good, coherent, well-run government to make it work. It needs Germany under Erhard, or it needs Japan during the era of its miracle, or whatever. It needs to be a well-sorted-out, joined-up government to make it work. It's an ambitious thing. It's not stupid. It seems to be an idea that has largely gone. I gather TSMC is building a plant in Japan, right? I mean,
Just done.
Yes. There's getting TSMC to build huge plants in the middle of Arizona would make sense. Getting BYD, I mean, I'm not sure Elon would be terribly happy about it, but getting BYD to sort of build a very big plant in Detroit that can hire all the people that GM and Chrysler have been laying off. Probably a pretty good idea for the American economy. Not a great idea for Elon Musk, and not something that, I mean, again, speaking from British experience, there was terrible discomfort at the notion that British cars are made by foreigners now, or that that it's foreign money, that there is no actual British car maker anymore. That hurts national pride a lot. It doesn't seem to matter so much these days because lots of big, successful Japanese and Korean car manufacturers employ lots of British people.
The new Mini Cooper is actually really good.
I'm sure it is.
And it has nothing to do with BMW. Nothing to do.
It's not made by British Leyland anymore. I don't think the British government holds stock in it. Anyway, yeah.
But it's very interesting, right? Because I mean, certainly, sort of from a very selfish Japanese perspective. I mean, I always tell investors the big, you would run scared of Japan, and the big Japan boom is going to be over if America opens up for the People's Republic of China. Because, whether it is productive capital or whether it's financial capital, if you and I can buy our Chinese mutual fund again, which right now we can't because it's sort of politically incorrect, that would obviously distract from the sort of wave of enthusiasm that we get towards Japan at the moment. Any additional questions? Please.
Thank you for the fascinating conversation. My name is Kaori Ida. I'm with NHK Public Broadcaster. I was relieved that you pronounced Stephen Miran rather than Myron, like most Americans do. In Japanese, it's Miran, so that was a relief. It seems like President Trump will be visiting Japan next month. We'll have a new prime minister next week. If you were to advise the new prime minister, what would you have him or her say and not say to President Trump?
far be it from me to, the idea that I'm fit to give advice to a Japanese prime minister. I think if you want to have an impression, make an impression on Donald Trump, first of all, I might advise the LDP to try Mrs. Takaichi, because Donald Trump definitely finds it more difficult to deal with women than with men. See some of the times he got into trouble with, he's twice beaten female candidates, but look at, he has a problem dealing with women compared to, he can't be so easily bullying in the way that he can with men. It's true. I know I have no great knowledge of the various candidates, but the fact that one of them, I keep being told, maybe it's because I'm British, that she could be the Japanese Thatcher, is quite startling. I don't think there is anything to be gained, and I think that the experience of Zelensky is quite interesting here. There is nothing to be gained by even politely pushing back. I've looked at the video of that Oval Office confrontation many times. I really don't see anything wrong with what Zelensky said, which triggered the response. Since then, Zelensky is, he's changed his tack. He's been very polite. That fascinating photo op at the Vatican, where it's just the two of them in the beautiful room. One of Zelensky's genuine strengths, he's a former actor, is that he is a good communicator. He's nice, he's charming, he's easy to like. And he seems to have, by basically not pushing back, actually got quite a startling change in position out of the man. Reading the British press during the Trump state visit has been amusing. There was there was the spoof suggestion that the king was getting in touch with Trump to say that actually there was a change of plan. It was the president could now meet his brother, Prince Andrew, instead, and they could reminisce about their friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and that got quite a lot of publicity. I don't know enough about Japanese sensibilities, but even British sensibilities. Okay, so we can really flatter this man by inviting him to Buckingham Palace and introducing him to the king. Okay, that'll help. We got a slightly better deal for what it's worth than other people did. It's probably not a bad idea. I don't think there's anything to be gained by really pushing back. I think I would probably emphasize how many people, Americans, are employed by Japanese companies in America. I believe it's quite a big number. I would try to be, I guess he seems to have lost his focus on China in the last few months, which is strange because China has actually, this is one of the things that's becoming clearer to me just from a week in Tokyo, that China is massively dumping on everybody else.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's the more aggressive trading nation than the US at the moment. But maybe suggesting that Japan really can be a friend and can behave well towards China might be something that he intuitively understands. Will the Japanese baseball playoffs be over by the time he's here? I'd definitely take him to a sumo. If there's any sumo to take him to, he likes professional wrestling, he likes mixed martial arts. For some reason, I don't understand, the TV sets in the Bloomberg office have been switched so that we've been watching sumo during the afternoons. I imagine that would keep Donald Trump very happy to take him to a sumo basho. The baseball playoffs are over by the time he comes here, right? I mean, he would be very excited to see a team called the Giants against a team called the Tigers, and they very nicely, actually, very much disappointed my kids who wanted some Japanese baseball gear. You know, it's all in English, you don't get Yomiuri in Japanese on your cap. You get YG on your cap. That's much less exciting than they thought it was going to be. But anyway, he will actually understand what's going on at a Japanese baseball game if that's still happening.
So it's very interesting.
Anyway, yes.
You may know the story when he was here doing Abe, right? They deliberately chose a restaurant for dinner where his big fat limousine couldn't go into the side street, so that you could have a nice piece of conversation that says, well, see, your cars just don't work here. But this is not a made-up story. This is the reality. I think we've got.
Hi, Takakato. I spent a couple decades on Wall Street and covering macro hedge funds. So obviously, I've been following your space and you're writing for a long time. Just from the title, I thought that today's conversation would touch a bit on the power balance between the tech billionaires and Trump, and I thought that's kind of what it was implying a bit. But I just maybe two quick questions on the end game for the tech billionaires are changing the way capitalism in the U.S. works. Right?
Yes.
And so obviously the MP, all these things are highly unusual of what they're doing. And U.S. capitalism seems to be really changing, becoming quite extreme. So just where you might see that ending or whatnot. The other is, you mentioned a bunch of inflection points in the market in the last year. One of them, which I think many of us here followed, was the rise in long-term bond yields. This is the 40-year in Japan, for example, and that the whole world changed once the Ministry of Finance in Japan changed the schedule.
Right.
So you'll see that the asset market's all right that point last year. So just the end game with bond markets, gold, things like that. I mean, they're pretty big implications.
Okay, on the tech billionaires, this was another big reason why the Trump trade was as strong as it was at the turn of the year. Silicon Valley has decided they're on side with this guy this time around. Was a big positive bullish point. And he has had conflicts with Zuckerberg and Bezos, particular at different points. It's one of the things that I am British. I am actually American. I married an American. I've made my home in America. I now have an American passport. So often when I talk with frustration and anger about America, just bear in mind, this is a country I've chosen as my country. So it's not, Americans react to somebody with my accent criticizing America. I am American now these days. One of the things that really disappoints me as an American is that if there is an obvious policy that would command a majority of the population and for which there is an argument, it's antitrust. There is an argument for antitrust. There is a bill that was going to try to work to split up the big tech companies that was jointly sponsored by Amy Klobuchar and Josh Hawley. So Amy Klobuchar I don't think she will get it, but she has a reasonable shot at being the next Democratic presidential nominee, and she wasn't so far from being nominated before. Josh Hawley is not out of the question as a presidential nominee for the Republicans. So, he's towards the right, but not that far towards the right of the current Republican Party. These are not fringe people. They are pretty much the center of gravity of their parties. And the degree of concentration in the states really is unprecedented. Probably because of failures of nerve by antitrust authorities over the preceding 20, 30 years. I think the Microsoft, that case went on a long time and had very little impact in the final analysis, and I think people may have overlearned that lesson. So one of the more obvious things somebody like Trump or a Democrat who might have a chance of winning in the current environment, one of the obvious policies that is antitrust. Companies as big as the Magnificent Seven at the moment are un-American. It's really it's very strange that hasn't become something that people have coalesced over. The single biggest reason why, I suspect, is because the tech bros successfully won over the one man they needed to win over. It's a problem when you have when policy is so centered on a guy who actually doesn't have that clear an anchor, a compass of what he believes. The other on bonds, I've brought this out many times in the past. I once wrote a 2,000-word piece for the Financial Times on how bond yields, the 10-year Treasury yield, had broken above 5%. And there was widespread belief that this meant the end of the generational bull market in bonds, the steady decline in the 10-year bond yield that had happened ever since Volcker. And I wrote that piece in the summer of 2007. And the 10-year bond yield did indeed hit bottom 13 years later. So I've seen, I do definitely believe that the pandemic finally broke that great bull market downwards in bond yields. I have been too ready to believe that bond yields are decisively breaking upwards on more than one occasion in my career. You certainly always have to be alive to the possibility. I do believe bond yields are trending upwards for the rest of my career. Bond markets tend to go in very long cycles, and for any number of reasons which would get rather dry and technical, the course of bond yields is upwards from here. And obviously, if that isn't the case here in Japan, that's quite alarming because they've been frighteningly low for so long. But I would be careful about, there are so many government workers, there are so many governments who have such an interest in bond yields not getting too high. And there is a belief, which I think is right, that ultimately what Scott Bessent has decided he is prepared to do is oversee financial repression. That financial repression may be the least worst outcome here, i.e. manipulation of the bond market that ultimately forces people to lend the government at an uneconomically low rate. It's not great. You can argue that it distributes the pain better than others. The kind of Andrew Mellon idea of letting everything rip in 1929, it's just too unfair to the people whose lives are completely ruined by it for those years before you've reached ground zero and you can start to regrow. So you can make an argument that financial repression may be the least worst option. We seem to have a government in the US that is prepared to resort to it. So I think about this all the time. I do think bond yields are trending upwards. I'm not sure they're going to be allowed to do what the bond market might want them to do, which is jolt upwards.
It's very interesting.
Yes, it's a very, very valid.
So it's very interesting on that. I mean, Scott, is a great admirer of Japan. And the one thing that Japan succeeded against all the clever people telling them you could not is that, trust me, I can control the 10-year yield, right? Which Japan did. Nobody believed it. George Soros. So, John, time's up.
Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you
have my bento
so much.
box now. Yes.
You have your bento box.
Yes.
I want to thank you very, very much. We could go on for quite a while. I'm sure there are many more.